Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if communism was pro-religion. As most of you may know, communism and religion always had a very complicated relation with each other. This is nothing surprising because Marx said that religion is the opium for the people. You may agree or disagree with him, but right now this is not the topic that we want to discuss. However, due to the fact that Marx positioned himself clearly in that regards, it would have been anyways difficult for communism to become more pro-religion. Pair that with the fact that the Tsar in Russia got the power from God to rule over Russia, as other monarchs did as well, and we can clearly understand why communism and religion could never really be reconciled. But what if all of this would change? What if communism was pro-religion? Going back some more years, it is possible to find priests, monks, and other people from the church or the clergy who were more left-leaning. There were various monks and priests who even had something akin to socialism as their own version of an utopia. If we would go way back into the past, Jesus might even be considered by some people nowadays a communist, as he wanted to give a voice to the poor, the sick, and the weak of the society. And if we were also to take other aspects into consideration, such as the fact that according to religion God created man in his own image, it would be very possible that a more communist or left-leaning interpretation of this could be done. Karl Marx, thinking about that, would perhaps drop his criticism towards religion and instead ask the good Christians or the good Jews, what would Jesus do if he saw the world of nowadays or of his times? I can't really predict the geopolitical changes that could happen with a more pro-religion communism, but I think until World War I, most of the bigger events, they would stay the same and they would develop in the same fashion. Would there be a Soviet Union? Perhaps, and if yes, it would be a different Soviet Union than the one of our timeline. Let's go a bit deeper if we would still have a Soviet Union, only that it would be a communist one, more pro-religious. Instead of abolishing the church and confiscating all that the church owns, it would happen differently. And only communist priests or left-leaning priests would hold power within the church. Priests were more literate, so they could write, and compared to the average population, it would help the communists to spread their ideology and their beliefs, because you should not forget that what the priest says during a mass, it is still very important and has a lot of influence over simple-minded folks. And now, of course, within the Soviet Union, we don't only have Christians, but we also have a Muslim population. And I think that communist beliefs within the Muslim population could also spread. Maybe they would not sympathize so much with it, but surely more so than in OTL. And the Muslim clerics, they could also read and write, while the simple Muslim peasant could not. And also the Muslim peasants, they had way less education, and thus this ATL's form of communism could appeal much more to the Muslim population and become more popular. This is very important, especially if we take this scenario a bit further. The interwar period could be more different. Christianity becomes more associated with communism and the left, while science would refocus a little bit and become more associated at least with an apolitical view or even with a right-wing movement. And movements like futurism and neo-paganism could have a long-lasting effect within the right wing, and also fascism, of course. The traditional center parties of Europe would be less Christian per se, but still hold very conservative values in regards to society. While the left would advocate for changes, but these changes that they would be for, they would be based on interpretations that they would do of the Bible. If the geopolitical situation would be the same, ATL, Iran and Afghanistan would become part of the Soviet bloc. And this is what I meant before by saying that this would be very important, especially for the Muslim world. This means that we would not have an intervention in Afghanistan from the Soviet Union, and down the line there would also be a very different evolution of terrorism, and it's even possible that Islamism per se would not even rise, because most of this power that would come from Islamism in OTL, in the ATL or the alternative timeline, it would switch and be refocused towards a more pro-religious communism. Poland would probably resist the Soviets way less in that alternate timeline, because, as you may know, Catholicism is still very important for Poland, and the church was one of the main institutions that was against the communist rule. And for the Islamic world, the Soviets would have high chances to find even more allies, which would be very difficult for the US to pull off some new allies. But another thing I would like to mention in this part is that countries perhaps like Saudi Arabia would still become allies of the US, because imagine you are still a very powerful king or ruler, and you're seeing that some clerics, they start to become more powerful, they start to have more people following them. Of course you will find it dangerous, and as a result we might even have a Saudi Arabia that is starting to become a little bit laicistic or secular, which would be a very different Saudi Arabia than, of course, the one that we have in our timeline. And due to the fact that churches already knew how to impose taxes and still had many taxes in ATL and OTL, and also that Islam, they have a very political dimension and also an economical dimension. If we take Sharia law and the 0% interest, etc., it could be even easier for communists in that timeline to nationalize different sectors of the economy. And those who don't like it, well, they would just go straight to hell, or they would even become traitors to the divine cause. It would be from God that the economy has to be redistributed, that the richness has to be redistributed, because after all, we are all made on the same image based on God. Much later on in that ATL, the left would be more intertwined with religion, while the right would support science. The left would show the right as cold, calculating, with no morale, even kind of sociopathic or psychopathic, while the right would portray the left as lunatic, naive, foolish, and the ones who would block national progress because they would be too superstitious. There would also be another political split, which in our timeline we don't have, but in that timeline would probably also be very important, and that's the split between religious people and nationalistic people. Nationalists will usually be atheist in that timeline, or non-religious, while religious people won't care for nations as long as the people in those nations, they would believe in the same divine class struggle, because all humans, according to them, were created equally. Most intellectuals in that timeline would surely be more from the right, because even though religion was always a very important institution where you could develop intellectual capacities, I mean, just look up Isidore of Seville, it is very clear that nowadays, or the more technology progresses, religion would have less answers for certain questions. And thus, if we take religion away from the political right, probably the intellectual people would rather be impressed by what the right could have to offer them. So after all, this ATL would maybe not be a very different one, but at least if we take the political sections, parties, and also the right and the left wing, they would be very, very different from our timeline.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.